Celebrations in the streets of Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo after Brazilian lawmakers take the first steps to impeach President Dilma Rousseff. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C., and this is The Heat. Just last year, Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff was celebrating her re-election. Now the long-embattled leader faces the very real possibility of being removed from power. On Sunday, members of Brazil's lower house of Congress reached the two-thirds majority needed to send the case against Rousseff to the Senate for a vote expected next month. The 68-year-old leader is accused of illegally using money from state-owned banks to conceal the country's budget deficit. President Rousseff's popularity and that of her Workers' Party have plummeted since last year when the economy fell into a deep recession. We begin our coverage now with our correspondent, Paulo Cabral, joins us from Brasilia. And Paulo, what exactly is President Rousseff accused of doing? And now that Brazil's Congress has voted for impeachment, what happens next?
Well, Anand, you know, today I was in Congress and I saw the impeachment process literally going from the lower house to the Senate. What I mean is that a clerk was like pushing this, like a shopping cart full of papers, thousands and thousands of pages that actually explain what President Dilma Rousseff would have done. That is quite complicated, you know, the kind of thing that only professional accountants really understand deeply. But basically it was what you said. She's accused of using money from public banks to write off government debts. That would be like taking money from one pocket to put into the other. But these would breach the budget laws in Brazil. You know, there is a very strict budget law in Brazil saying what these authorities can or cannot do. And so what they say is that she would have breached these laws. The government says is that this was common practice in previous governments, which is kind of true, even though President Rousseff did use this instrument much more. You know, the numbers, the figures are much bigger, but yes, you know, it seems a fact that this was done to some extent also in other governments, and no one was ever accused of that. So she says that she's being unfairly accused of something, and she's honest. She's not accused of having taken money for herself, and so she says this is all a coup d'etat.
Above all else, I want to tell you today that I feel I have been wronged. I feel wronged because I believe that this is a process without substance. That is why I feel I have been wronged. Injustice occurs when a means to defend oneself is crushed.
Paulo, now as you say, this goes to the Senate. If she is convicted in the Senate by a vote, who would replace her?
Well, that would be Michel Temer, the vice president, who's not from the president's party. You know, as you know, in Brazil, it's a very fragmented political system. There are 25 parties here in parliament, and so usually it's an alliance. That means that alliances, you know, in politics, they don't always last. So it was also seen, of course, and this makes the impeachment stronger. If it was the same party as the president and the vice president, maybe this would not have happened. But as it's a different party that's going to be in government now, if President Rousseff is really unseated, that's Michel Temer, the vice president from Brazil's largest party. There are no allegations of corruption against him personally or anything like that, even though there are allegations that he would have also signed the same kind of accountant's instruments that Dilma Rousseff is accused of using. But one thing that Brazilians are not happy about is that the second in line would be the chairman of the lower house, Eduardo Cunha, and he's accused of having money, Switzerland accounts and all that, you know House of Cards, certainly you know the show. He's very much compared to Frank Underwood here in Brazil, you know, and it does ring a bell.
And Paulo, Brazil is facing an economic crisis right now. What is public opinion like? Do a majority of Brazilians want Rousseff to step down?
Well, first thing, nobody's happy in Brazil. You know, I don't think you're going to find many people here that would say they're happy with the way the government is going or the way the economy is going. You know, inflation is high, unemployment is high. You have this political crisis where for weeks nothing has been discussed in government, that not the impeachment, whether there will be impeachment or not, while the problems are only mounting. So nobody's really happy. So it comes down to people that are unhappy but think that President Rousseff should stay, and those who are unhappy but want President Rousseff to go. we'll have to take the surveys for that. You know, about 60% usually say that they want the impeachment of President Dilma Rousseff. So yes, there is a majority, seemingly now, that want to see her out. But it's really a polarized situation, you know, extremely divided. You cannot say that it's clear, absolutely clear on one side or the other. Just the fact that these groups that want President Rousseff out are mostly, not only, but mostly in the middle classes, in big cities. So they certainly are much more visible than the groups that support President Rousseff more, that are more in the Brazilian countryside.
Thanks, Paulo. That's CCTV's Paulo Cabral reporting from Brasilia in Brazil. Joining us now from Rio de Janeiro is João Ferreira Jr. He's a professor of political science at the Rio de Janeiro State University. Here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio is Eric Farnsworth. He's the vice president of the Americas Society and the Council of the Americas. And from Sao Paulo, we're joined by Paulo Setero. He's the director of the Brazil Institute of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. Thanks to all of you for joining us. João, let me start with you. When we look at this impeachment process in Brazil right now, was it expected, and how big an impact is this going to have on the country?
The scandal. I mean, the impeachment case, you ask?
Yes, sir.
I think that, you know, as it was said before, the country is paralyzed because of this impeachment case. And, you know, government is incapable to proceed, and normal government is incapable to proceed. We're going through economic crisis. I mean, I think the political crisis in Brazil has been causing, I mean, has been one of the main causes of the economic crisis we're having now. So the impact has been pretty big, and it's a protracted crisis too, you know. So it's not bound to end very quickly, I think, because we have the procedures in the Senate now, and still they can be contested in the Supreme Court. So you know, there's not a fixed date for that to end, and I'm not sure also that, you know, her impeachment would bring tranquility to the political system. And that Michel Temer, if he actually replaces Dilma Rousseff, he would be able to govern in peace and tranquility.
Eric, given what João just said, that, you know, we're not going to see a quick end to this, and, you know, some commentators are saying that there could be a prolonged period of uncertainty, of instability, even in Brazil in the wake of this impeachment. Do you believe that to be the case? What kind of impact is that going to have?
Well, I think that begs the question, what's the end game here?
Yeah.
If she's impeached and forced to leave office, she's been impeached, but if she's forced to leave office, or if in fact that she beats the rap, if you want to put it that way, and is actually able to come back after sitting out for 180 days and doing all the things that are required in the Brazilian constitutional system. But no matter what happens, this will be a protracted scenario, and the outcome is not only uncertain, but what happens after the impeachment process concludes is also uncertain. And the fact that Brazilian society has been so divided now on this issue really means that you almost have to look ahead to the next elections, perhaps in 2018, to find an obvious point where Brazilians could go to the polls, clean the slate, start over, and try something fresh. But that takes you between now and then. That's over a 2-year period. In between, you have the Olympics, you have economic crisis, and you have a country that's really beginning to question its own direction in a very fundamental and very serious way. So that's a hugely long period of time, and in political terms, it's almost an eternity. So there really aren't any good answers here.
Paulo, where do you think the end game goes? Is President Rousseff going to survive this? Is she, as Eric just put it, going to beat the rap? Or is this the beginning of the end of her political career?
More probably the end of her political career. President Dilma Rousseff is not popular. She's not very much liked. She doesn't have much of a chance of survival in the current environment. Now, what's going to happen, it will depend mightily on the capacity of the vice president. I believe will step in as acting president probably as early as next week to form a viable government and deal with the first thing he has to deal with is the crisis of legitimacy because of the cast of characters involved, especially the Speaker of the House, Eduardo Cunha, from the state of Rio de Janeiro, who is a notorious corrupt politician. There is a problem of legitimacy in the process. The Vice President, who is a professor of constitutional law, is certainly aware of this, and he has a window here, it's a small window where he has to appoint an able cabinet with efficient, effective Minister of Finance, effective Justice Minister, names are being mentioned, where you can, with some measures, restart to reestablish confidence. He has to resolve the problem of credibility by performing. And he has a small window if he is capable of putting the economy, or signaling that the economy is not going to go into the abyss, which is where it's headed now. He can probably start gaining some support from a population that does not like President Dilma Rousseff. The reason the congressman in Brazil voted to impeach her is that because politicians interpret popular mood very well, and they decided to go by a large majority. The votes were 25 votes above the two-thirds majority required to impeach. So now, very difficult, not at all sure, but there is here a window for Temer to act. Let's see what he does.
João, as we've been hearing, President Rousseff is not a popular president right now. As Paula told us just a moment ago, there's more than half of Brazilians do not like her being in that office. How deeply divided is Brazil right now? I mean, we shouldn't forget the fact that this was a president who won an election just a few months ago, albeit by a very small margin.
Exactly. I mean, let's not forget that she got more than 54 million votes, and she reached the popularity of more than 90% in her first term. So I think that this kind of surveys are very much driven by the situation, the context. And when you ask people if they want to impeach Dilma, I mean, regular people don't actually know exactly what's the meaning of that. I think we're right to say that if the situation is not good, they probably might say that they want to remove the president or they want something new. But I don't think that it's a matter of people dislike her at all. And if the situation, economics get better, her popularity can improve too. So, and I think that on the other side, if you compare, Michel Temer is a shadow operator. He has never been voted into presidency. And he's not popular at all, I think. That his popularity is not, at least in terms of popular acceptance, he's not bound to succeed, I think. And on top of that, I mean, he is one of the main leaders of a party, PMDB, which is extremely fractured already. So, and on top of that, in order to govern, he will have the same problem that PT and all other governments have in Brazil, is to form a coalition of support. And he will definitely have to negotiate with PSDB, which is the largest opposition party, and PSDB is also, always presents candidates, viable candidates for presidency in Brazil. So these guys are going to be together in a coalition, and with 2 years in front of them, and they're all looking in different directions, I think, and with different plans for the 2018 election. So I cannot see, a situation in which Temer. And on top of that, Temer is going to have all civil societies and social movements against him. Because, most social movements, the workers, and all social movements, I mean, are basically on the left and against Temer. So, he will have a huge problem of legitimacy and of, governing Brazil if he inherits government.
Right, Eric, when we look at exactly what the president has been accused of doing, this budgetary sleight of hand, creative accounting, if we call it that. Is that so unusual in Brazil? Because as we heard Paulo Cabral, our reporter, tell us earlier on, the man who could become president, Michel Temer, has said, well, I kind of would have done the same thing too.
It seems not to be so unusual in the Brazilian context. It's not for me to say, but Brazilians have said as much, and the president has said as much. She said, I didn't do anything wrong. In fact, some people would say that her primary guilt is being president during a time of severe economic dislocation in Brazil and following a very popular president and some very positive years from an economic perspective. And so she doesn't have the political popularity to be able to withstand charges of illegality. Those charges will now be adjudicated in the Senate, as we've been talking about. But I think the point that both João and Paulo have been mentioning is critically important, and that is that it's not like this is going to resolve the whole issue. There is a deep strain of political movement in Brazil that if the president is forced to leave, will say this isn't because she did anything illegal, or many people don't know what impeachment is, as João was saying, but rather this is an attack on the left wing in Brazil. This is trying to throw out people who are trying to improve social welfare and social inclusion and these sorts of things. And so you get this sort of narrative that can develop that will make whoever is president in Brasilia is going to just make governability much more difficult to actually do. I think that is a very key issue and is going to determine going forward how Brazil responds.
And sets a bad precedent in how you want to change governments.
Absolutely right.
Right, we're going to have to take a break right now. More of our conversation about Brazil's impeachment battle right after this. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat. Welcome back to The Heat. We're discussing the impeachment crisis facing Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff. Let's get back to our panel. Paulo, I want to come to you. Let's take a listen to what President Rousseff said before deputies started casting their votes in this impeachment vote. Let's watch.
I caution those who see in the impeachment proceedings a shortcut to power. They may justify it among themselves, but they will never be able to look into the eyes of the nation, because the word coup remains forever etched on the foreheads of the traitors of democracy.
So, Paulo, if we listen there, those are tough words from President Rousseff there, calling this a coup. She's casting this as a coup. Is she right?
Well, most legal experts here don't agree with her. This thing, it has followed a path of a constitutional path. Again, there is no legal issue here. There is a legitimacy problem, as João mentioned, as I mentioned before. She was indicted for crimes of responsibility under the Constitution, for creating unauthorized expenditures, for hiding those expenditures, hiding a huge budget deficit that, when revealed after her re-election in October 2014, cost her popularity. She was 3 months after being re-elected, her popularity dropped to single digits, and investors decided to no longer invest in Brazil, and that is what caused the economy to plunge into the worst recession in 80 years, which has already cost the jobs to 3,500,000 people. This is what is surrounding this, and people want her out. That's what the reaction of the congressmen there. I believe that the process will continue in Congress. I further believe that they will not have much difficulty finding the 54 votes to remove her from office. The problem for Mr. Temer, who is unpopular, as most politicians in Brazil are today, is to move ahead with concrete measures that can rebuild some measure of confidence and stabilize the situation. Whether he is capable of becoming a statesman, he remains to be seen.
Okay, João, one way of looking at this is that it's a constitutional matter, it's a legal matter, as Paulo Sotero has just been pointing out. The other way of looking at this is that President Rousseff has been presiding over a bad economy, as Eric points out, and that the opposition, because of this bad economy, because she was with her back up against the wall, found a way of dethroning her. But as I pointed out, that sets a very bad precedent, doesn't it? Because what's going to happen then is whenever you have a leader that you don't like, you threaten that leader with impeachment in Brazil.
Exactly. I mean, if you pay attention on the rhetoric of the representatives yesterday, you can see that almost none of them addressed the actual legal issue involved, and that was a political, judgment. That, as a matter of fact, they're removing her because for some reason they don't like her anymore. And they called upon themselves the right to cancel the election. And that's why it's been called a coup, because, in presidential systems, the election determines, who's going to stay in office for 4 years. And I don't think there is enough, reasons for Dilma to be ousted, because many other Brazilian presidents, other Brazilian previous presidents did that too, governors do that too. There is some lenience with a budgetary law that is very strict and very neoliberal, and many people don't like the way it is. And Dilma Rousseff did not create any extra expenditures, as a matter of fact. So there are many reasons, why one can argue that's a political judgment, and then, the way it's being done, it looks like a coup. A coup doesn't have to be, only legal. It can be, a political coup.
Eric, politics is politics, but these actions in Brazil will have practical consequences for the country's economy. How will business respond to this in Brazil?
That's absolutely right, Anand. The business hates uncertainty, and anything that creates uncertainty is obviously something that's bad for business. Brazil's been in a recession already. 2015 was a negative growth of 3.5% or so. Projections for 2016 would be similar. And 2 years of year-on-year negative growth over 3%, that's really quite a bad scenario. Reference was made to investment slowing down. I think that's absolutely right. And we have to remember, some of this is cyclical. It's based on commodities markets. It's based on China's slow growth profile now. So these are exogenous factors that no president of Brazil could have anything to do with. But having said that, there were a number of things, and there are a number of things that need to be done in the Brazilian context that really have been ignored or pushed off to the future because they're inconvenient to do now. Some of the economic reforms in terms of pensions or in terms of infrastructure or in terms of the tax code, all these things that are well known, but when an economy is doing really well, there's no incentive for change. And that's been really what's happened in Brazil over the past several years. Particularly with Dilma's predecessor, President Rousseff's predecessor, Ignacio Lula da Silva. So you had a situation where people were just pushing that off into the future. Well, now the future is here, and the commodities markets are down. China's slowing, as I said, and you have a scenario whereby that opportunity to try to grow through other means, those other engines of growth, simply aren't there. So that gives a real sobering analysis of, even if they resolve some of these political issues, there are still some very dramatic economic steps that need to be taken to restore growth. But the point that I would make is those steps on the economic side will be virtually impossible to take until and unless you resolve the political side and have the political will and consensus to be able to move forward on those very politically costly economic steps. And that might mean that you have to look forward again to the elections to 2018. But in the business and economic context, 2 more years of negative growth is really going to be a long time to wait.
And they need certainty. Paulo, what is your view on that? As Eric points out, here we have a president, a beleaguered president, facing a bad economy. There are things she should have done. There are things which she couldn't do. The fact that Brazil is a country that sells its commodities to outside customers, and the fact that demand from those customers has dropped, as in the case of China, is not her fault, really, is it?
Well, the commodity cycle, the super cycle of commodities, ended for every country on earth. It didn't hit only Brazil. Other countries that were affected by the fall of prices of commodities did not go into the type of crisis Brazil did. This is a homegrown crisis produced by a mix of miscalculations, mismanagement, and incompetence. And we, Brazilians, are mad at that. They see this. Now, getting out of this is not going to be easy. This is an opportunity for Mr. Temer, for his closed allies, because expectations, by the way, regarding Temer are very, very low. So this gives him some sort of opening. Now, Nobody is going to take this lightly. I don't believe this is a very sad episode, but not only the first woman president of Brazil is ending her term in disaster. I think this is probably a very sad episode also for former President Lula, once revered in Brazil, the first man of the people, in one of the most unjust societies on earth, to reach presidential power and to govern well initially. So this is a tough, very difficult situation. The room for maneuvering is not very large.
Right.
Acting president to be Temer has an opportunity. Let's see if he is capable of moving from an able politician to a statesman. No, it's a very difficult thing to do, but that's what he has to do.
Okay, João, I've just got a minute left. If you could be quick about this, please. I mean, this could not have come at a worse time for Brazil. It's got the Olympics coming up in just a few months. It's trying to manage the spread of the Zika virus. Is it going to be able to manage all these multiple challenges?
Who's going to be able to manage that?
Brazil.
Temer?
Yes.
Oh, Brazil in general?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I think we will. I mean, eventually. We've been through very rough patches in the past. I mean, I'm not a young person, so I've seen bad things. I don't think that, you know, the situation is so bad in terms of in economic terms. For business, I think that we should not confuse the way business behaves and the will of the people. I mean, how people feel the situation. So I think that business is much more discontent with the economy, with everything else, and it's a little bit slow. It's slow in getting into people, and I think that it has to be with the virtue of Dilma if she survives. Of Temer, I don't think he has the capability to do that. And to fix things in the future.
Okay, I'm going to have to end it there. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.